I know the day. Louder, you're like, yeah, finally the riffraff left after last beat, right? It took your seats. Oh, it's crazy. Those people. I'm only kidding. It's good to see everybody. No? That's raising like that Easter hangover at church. Like, where'd everybody go? No, it is good. We're in this series, the healing circle we're talking about. And I'm just noticing here the back screen seems to be, there it goes. They got it fixed. We're having some issues there. But my name is Ryan, the lead pastor. If you are a guest, thank you so much for being here. If you have come back, thank you so much for coming back. If you come regularly, thank you for doing that. It's just not nearly as fun with nobody in the roof. So thank you so much for doing that. If you are a guest that you have questions and you'd like to learn more about our church or about my journey here, our family, all that good stuff. If I say something today that you're like, that's blasphemy, and you want to have a conversation about it, I would love to do that. Inside the program is my cell phone number, and you could send me a text message and we could set up coffee or breakfast or whiskey or whatever you want to do. And we'll have a good time and we'll answer any questions and hopefully help you to know a little bit more about our church. All right. But we're in this series called The Healing Circle. And we're going to be talking about how can we bridge kind of the gap at times between our tradition, the tradition that Crossroads is a part of, the Christian tradition, and the wisdom that offers us, but also the wisdom that we can glean from the indigenous ancestors that walked this land that we're sitting on. And that's kind of what this series is all about, is how can we live into a life of healing personally? What can we do to love ourselves so that we might love others well? And we equate that with loving God. Now, let me ask you this question. If I say the word, I want you to be a healthy person. Like, what emotion do you feel when I say the word healthy? Or maybe if I were to put the word physically in front of that, I want you to be visibly healthy. Or maybe I would say I want you to be spiritually. Like, what emotion comes to mind when you hear the word healthy? Like, do you immediately get energized? Do you immediately think, where's the exit? Are you immediately hungry for a voodoo donut like me, you know? How about the word exercise? Oh, man, we had a bodily response to that one. Man, that was a somatic response, we like to call that, when the body just viscerally responds to a word like exercise, right? What do you think about, right? Some people get super excited. They're like, that's my jam. Other people are like, I am allergic to that. Very much allergic to that. Well, the truth is, when we talk about the word health, when we start talking about our lives and we start talking about physical health, it can be frustrating. Because we live in a culture that offers us messages that are sometimes mixed and they offer a confusing picture, right? And oftentimes our culture will confuse things like beauty for health. Y'all ever experience that? Right? And in our culture, like this beauty culture that we live in, we will equate beauty with the idea of positive health. And that can be very frustrating because all of a sudden we find ourselves chasing these unrealistic beauty standards. Not everyone can look as good as I do. So you should stop trying, right? But we do like the television, the magazine, the ads in Twitter and Instagram, and everybody's posting their best life and they're posting their photos and their videos of them working out in the gym and all these things. And we start to equate that. And then we start believing that we should have a certain body type or be a certain weight. And then we think then, oh, these are indicators of health. And then we often ignore other far more important indicators of health and wellness at times. And in our hearts and in our lives, we all of a sudden are just chronically dissatisfied with who we are. We start looking at ourselves, I don't look like this. I don't live up to this standard. And then we find ourselves like maybe even engaging in more unhealthy behaviors, right? This idea of appearance-based standards that sets into our hearts or our lives. And these standards often do overlook real health indicators like strength and mobility and nutrition, even things like our emotional balance. Another thing that happens that produces this frustration when we think about the concept of health and wellness and well-being is we think that physical health is an individual achievement, right? We have this idea that I've got to like think about my own wellness, my own health, that it's an individual act. And that can be really frustrating. It's frustrating because all of a sudden we feel isolated.
right? We're in it all on our own, trying to become healthy people. And then we find, and all of a sudden we think that our worth is tied into like our individual effort. Like, you make, how many of you have ever made New Year's resolutions around your health, right? Anybody ever done that before? I'll wait. Be honest. I'm not saying you kept it. I'm just saying you made it, right? And then you don't keep it, and then you just feel bad about yourself. Oh, I'm so not disciplined, right? Or you try the latest fad health, whether it's a diet or an exercise program, and then that doesn't work. And then we just start to, like, our own sense of self and identity, like, tanks. And again, these things just end up focusing on self-image. And that, when we start to focus on our self-image, what do? We start to compare ourselves to others. Y'all ever compared yourself to others? Right? Nothing good comes from comparison. Only thing that comes from comparison is pride or self-loathing. There's just nothing healthy that ever comes from it. And we find ourselves lonely or even filled with more anxiety as we look at the way other people, and when we live in a world like we do with social media everywhere, boy, that stuff just like comes in and it starts to shape our minds and the way we think about each other. Another big thing that produces a lot of frustration when we start talking about wellness and healing and health is that we start to believe that our bodies, we get these messages that our bodies need to be fixed, right? That our bodies need to be perfected. And that can create a lot of frustration. How many of you have ever felt that way? That I'm just supposed to have the perfect body, and I need to get everything fixed, and I got to get this tucked, and I got to get this stretched, and I got to get this lifted, and all these things, right? And it creates this sense of frustration because all of a sudden we start viewing ourselves through this lens of, like my body is inherently flawed. And that just will create this cycle of dissatisfaction and shame and self-criticism. And at the end of the day, our health, our healing, our ideas of wellness and well-being, we get so frustrated by these messages that they actually become a barrier for forward movement. That we don't actually make any steps forward. We don't keep moving. We don't start moving because we just go, I can't meet those standards. And as we get kind of launched into this idea of the healing circle, and as we think about indigenous wisdom and the wisdom from our scriptures, this is where I want to start with this idea of moving. And I want to kind of look at and take a big picture approach to this idea today. And we'll kind of harness it into one element, but today's going to kind of function as a little bit of a template for what we're going to do over the next 6 or 7 weeks. And I've got one sentence from the Bible for you today. Some of you are like, this will be a short message, then it'll only be an hour, right? No, I've got one sentence for you today. There's this little letter in the New Testament. If you're new to, engaging with Scripture or thinking about Bible study, New Testament is kind of the second half, starts with the story of Jesus, and then kind of develops as to how people interpreted the life of Jesus, how they created communities around this Jesus movement. And there's this little letter called 3 John. And we don't really know who wrote the letter. It's just described to John, but it could have been anybody who wrote this letter. But 3 John, and there's only one chapter in this. So if you want a reading goal for the Bible this week, just like, I'm going to read the book of 3 John. You'll knock that one out, okay? So 3 John, verse 2, okay? 3 John, verse 2, this is what it says. Beloved, I love that word, beloved. I pray that all may go well with you, and that you may be in, what's the word? Good health, just as it is well with your soul. Right? I pray that you'd be in good health, just as it is well with your soul. And when I think about this one little sentence, there's so much packed into it, right? Beloved, you are loved. Loved whether you're healthy or not healthy, you're loved. And there's a desire in the writer, for whoever the audience is, that they would have a sense of well-being that goes beyond just their spiritual understanding, but that their health itself, their very life, would be healthy. And what we get from this one little sentence is something really powerful, is that body health and soul health, right? Or what we might call physical health or spiritual health. This idea of what we see, the corporeal, right? All that stuff, the molecules, the atoms, like that is an integrated reality. Those two things are. Body health and soul health go hand in hand. That if we want to experience wellness, if we want to be people of well-being, then we have to think about ourselves holistically. And too often we neglect one for the other. Too often we can get caught up, especially in religious circles, that the only thing that matters is the soul. And we can start thinking about, I just have to do all the soul things right. I've got to get all these spiritual disciplines, all these spiritual habits right. And we neglect our physical bodies. We neglect the care of the very tool, the temple, the tent, as Paul would call it, that houses, right, the spirit, the soul, all of that. And so what we want to talk about really over this next 2 weeks is how can we kind of get a mind shift to hold both of these things in balance? Like, how can we learn to think about well-being and produce and be people of wellness that think holistically, that recognize that we can't truly be healthy if we're not healthy both spiritually and physically. And I use the word spiritually in a very broad context, right? That if we're neglecting one of those. Now, it's very easy, especially when we grow up in a world that is highly religious and we're thinking about things like eternity. And maybe you grew up in a context like mine, where the most important thing that you could ever answer is, where are you going to spend eternity? I don't know about you, but I was like, I don't know. It feels like that's not up to me. It's a big question. And so you spend, and you're maybe taught certain things and you get certain signals, and the world gets indexed in a certain way, that these are the things that will make sure that your soul has eternal rest, and these are the things that will make sure your soul has, and so why would we worry about this 70, 80, 90, 100 years on this planet when we have all of eternity to worry? So we don't even think about this idea of our health. Or maybe you grew up in a world that didn't have anything to do with faith or the divine or the mystery or the universe or church or whatever word you want to use to describe what is indescribable. And there was no sense of that. So it was highly motivated around what you ate and your movement and your activities, but there was a deep neglect in the care of the part of you that made meaning of it all. And so what I want to do is, throughout this series, we're gonna develop a tool that we're gonna learn from the indigenous wisdom that exists in our world. And we're going to learn how to apply this into some ways. And hopefully you'll walk away from this series with a tool that you don't need me. But you will automate your giving online. Okay? That's my goal, is that we fund the work and you never have to come. Okay? You never have to be here. No. But that's the idea, like how we walk away from the series equipped for our everyday normal lives, not dependent necessarily on some professional out there, okay? And here's the thing. So as we do this, I want to talk today about the first application of the healing circle, and that is the idea of movement, right? And so Indigenous wisdom offers us an opportunity to think about integrated movement as a healing practice. Right? If Scripture says, I pray that you are healthy in your body and also your soul, I want to look at how this practice, this wisdom of movement, can be a healing circle. So today, what I don't want us to miss is that movement is a healing circle. Now you're sitting here going, well, okay, that's fair, but what is a healing circle, right? What are you talking about? I'm so confused. How come you can't just give a talk that is straightforward? I always leave more confused than I started. Okay, so here's what we're going to talk about. I want to talk about the medicine wheel. How many have ever heard of the medicine wheel before? Anybody ever heard of a medicine wheel? Oh, good. We'll all learn something today. So the medicine wheel is an indigenous tool, image, that really speaks to the integrated understanding of life. In the book, The Seven Circles, which I would encourage, if you're here and you're kind of walking through this material, like I'm actually gaining a lot of information from this one resource called The Seven Circles. And we're actually there's so much more you could unpack on your own. You could get together with some folks. You could read it together. You could come out on Thursday night to the Thursday night conversation group and talk more about these things. But in their book, The Seven Circles, right, the authors write this. They say the medicine wheel is an ancient symbol. It's a circle divided into 4 parts, and you see it up here, usually red, black, yellow, and white. And it symbolizes balance, interconnectedness, and gratitude for all things that bring us life, or all things that bring us health, right? We could say that. We could say all things that bring us wholeness, all things that bring us a sense of peace, right? We're peacemakers here. And one common interpretation of the medicine wheel is that each quadrant represents these 4 universal kind of parts of existence: mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual, okay? So this is a medicine wheel at its like most simplest form. And now, indigenous cultures are varied. It's not a monolith. A monolith means it's just like there's not just one way of being in an indigenous culture. There are thousands of ways in which I think there's something like, I don't have it, I think there's something like over 400 indigenous recognized nations in America. I think there's 70 in Canada. There's something like 400 or 500 different languages, right? So we have to be really careful that we're not saying, oh, a medicine wheel is this for all indigenous peoples, because it's not. It can vary. But this is the basic principle. Now, what I want you to think about is, if you've been around for the last few weeks, right, I want you to think about Jesus' words in Mark. In Mark chapter 12, verse 30, where Jesus is asked, what's the most important commandment? In Mark chapter 12, Jesus says you're to love the Lord your God with what? With all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Jesus in Mark offers 4. In other gospels, he only offers 3, but I'm not going to talk about those because 4 works way better with this, okay? And I'm just honest enough to tell you. Let's just pretend this is exactly what Jesus said. See, other people won't be as honest with you about the inconsistencies, right? But so Jesus throws in a 4th one in this side. You know, maybe somebody was writing down and Jesus forgot one time, you know? And that's even scarier for some of you, that Jesus could forget something, but, you know, he was human. Okay, so, and it is not a sin to forget something, by the way. Some spouses need to know that. It's not a sin if I forget something, Wendy. Maybe if I forget things multiple times, you know, or lying and saying I didn't forget, maybe that falls in that moral category, right? Now you think about that healing circle, right? And we have these 4 quadrants, these 4 universal realities. Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then he says, love your neighbor as yourself. So you love your neighbor with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. You love yourself with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And a few weeks ago, we talked about how this works backwards. And we start with, if we start by loving ourselves with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, then we will be able to love our neighbor with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And in doing those 2 things, we're effectively fulfilling the greatest commandment, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Too often we start with love God, and we think that loving God means going to church and doing all these things, okay? But it's actually the other way around. We got to start with ourselves. And that's really what this whole series is about. So, right, I mean, we could probably do this. This is not a trick question. I could give you a pop quiz right now. I would be like, okay, Jesus said to love the Lord your God with all your mind. Which quadrant would mind go into? It's, again, not a trick question, folks. Mental. Love the Lord your God with all your strength. Physical. Oh, you're on a roll now. Love the Lord your God with all your soul. Spiritual. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. You all could do this without me. See, we're already on the path of my being unnecessary. I love it. Right, that's the idea. So we have now the medicine wheel. And the medicine wheel is the healing circle. Because the medicine wheel forces us to be holistic in our approach to things that we think will produce healing, or to things that need healing. So you could take the medicine wheel and you could say, okay, I want to have a healthy family. And then you can impose that idea of family, and you can start asking yourself a question. Okay, what does it mean to leverage my strength to have a healthy family? What does it mean to leverage my mind to have a healthy family? What does it mean to leverage my emotions in a healthy family? So you can take the medicine wheel and you can impose it into arenas where you want to be healthy, right? You think about your whole physical health, and you can think this way, all right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at these. We're going to talk about 7, okay? We're going to talk about 7 things that we can run through the medicine wheel that will help us produce health in our mind and our soul, and we'll leverage our mind, our soul, our strength, our emotions, to produce a holistic sense of who we are. So let me pause for a second and say, does that make sense? Because if it doesn't, you just probably should come back in like 8 weeks. No, I'm just kidding. If it doesn't make sense, let's talk, okay? But this is important because this is the healing circle, right? The healing circle is something that is universal and can be applied as a tool for us to think about health. Think about your finances, okay? Think about your I know most of you don't. You're independently wealthy, so you don't ever have to think about that. You just whatever. But let's say you weren't independently wealthy and you actually lived within some boundaries, right? How do I approach my finances with health, right? Well, you say, okay, I'm gonna think about a medicine wheel for my finances. And what is it? How do I use my strength to create healthy finances? How do I use my emotions? How do I think about my emotions in that? How do I think about my soul in that, right? And you can develop tools and practices, okay? So today I want to talk about taking this idea and in your everyday normal life, how do you create and implement a healing circle of movement? So how can the indigenous wisdom of movement integrated into life produce wellness? Because here's the thing, you and I are sedentary creatures, right? We live in a sedentary world. Most of us sit the majority of the day. Most of us don't have to go out every day and hunt and gather. Anybody in the room have to go out and hunt and gather? No, I mean, I go to the grocery store. That's my idea of gardening, by the way. So those of you that have gardens, I don't know how you don't know this yet. Like King Soopers, Safeway, their garden is bigger and better than yours. I mean, you're months out there, and it's like 5 minutes. No. And gardening isn't free. I'm just saying, like, I don't know. It's a sign of mental illness. I'm not sure. If you have a garden and there's a grocery store right down the street, I don't understand it. I'm just joking, okay? So let's talk about a healing circle of movement. So the indigenous wisdom of movement is that indigenous folks and their ancestors would teach generations through integrated movement that life was movement. You moved, you didn't sit. Right? And so we do live in a completely different culture, but we can learn this idea of I can actually bring movement in intentionally and produce wellness, right? And I can think about my physical body as a whole, not in terms and words that we get from the West, like exercise, right? Like beauty and dieting, right? But how do I take movement, right? And you see this sometimes, it's like, I gotta get a Fitbit and I gotta get my 10,000 steps in, right? And so you have a meeting and you're just stepping during the meeting, right? I gotta get my 10,000 steps in, okay? So let's talk about this. What kind of movement in your, and I left some space there for you to think about your life, right? In between these. You can write down things, figure it out, but like, what does it mean to have, like, what does it mean to use your mental energy, to bring movement into your mind, into your mental energy? Well, you could think about moving while you're learning. How many of y'all listen to podcasts? Right? Audiobooks, right? You can actually learn but produce movement in that. When you're listening to a podcast, say, I'm going to move. I'm just going to walk while I listen. I'm going to do something while I do that, right? So you can incorporate movement. You can use your mind to learn about movement, right? There are, and actually in the book, The Seven Circles, there's a great couple of pages that deal with like the basic movements of the body and how you strengthen those through movement, right? And that create health and well-being for life, right? So that's thinking about, okay, how do I bring movement through the lens of my mind? Well, now let's talk about like strength or physical movement. Love the Lord your God with all your strength. So this is the kind of stuff we think about, right? Movement, like that active, invigorating movement, the stuff that produces the little sweat beads, right? The sweat that comes from movement, right? That gets the heart flowing, gets the blood flowing, get the heart pumping, right? It energizes our bodies, right? And it's an honoring of our physical strength, right? So what do you do? What can you do? How can you and I bring movement into the spaces of our lives where it's more vigorous? So for some that might be dancing, or it could be running, or maybe going on a brisk walk, or lifting weights, or you might have certain limitations. And so the movement for you is going to look different. But what brings you joy? What brings you energy, but also requires energy of you? Right? That's one way to think about this. Then we can talk about spiritual soul movement. Right? How do we take movement and apply it to our souls, to spiritual life? Well, we can talk about meditation. Oh, I know some people get really weirded out by that word. Deep thinking, it's a scary thing, I know. It's actually non-thinking, which is even more scarier. But you will not invite a demon into your life by not thinking, okay? I promise that. The foolishness that we put out there in our fear of other ways of thinking about spiritual stuff, right? But you could do meditative walking. Meditation focuses on breathing, right? Meditation is a way of resolving anxiety. I mean, in the Christian tradition, they have a thing called silent prayers. It's the same thing. Please don't go pick a yoga studio, okay? But we can have mindfulness, right? And you can learn breathing techniques and breathing exercises that help remove the anxiety, right? Remove that just for them and to reset and recenter yourself. And you can walk while you're doing that, right? For those of you that want to engage with this concept of prayer, of interconnectivity with the divine, right? Do prayer walks. This is old school stuff, but if you live in a neighborhood and you could walk and just open your mind up to the things that are around you that give you clues as to what's happening in people's lives. And so you can actually be mindful and prayer and releasing of what you might call good energy, whatever words you use, it's all user-friendly, good thoughts, good vibes, whatever. It's all the same thing. But you can walk around, and if you see a little tricycle in a yard, you can pray for wisdom for that family that's raising a child. But I don't know him, Ryan. Huh? That's okay. You know what it's like to raise a child, maybe, or you know somebody that knows what it's like to raise a child, or you ran into a kid one day in the grocery store and you were like, hell no, I'm not doing that, right? Somehow you have a lived experience with a child and you're like, they need prayer. I don't even know if I believe in it, but they need it, right? You might see a car that's leaking oil, be like resources for a new car. Just release that into their lives, right? So you can do this, but you're moving and you're walking, right? So this is how we kind of think about health and bringing movement with our spiritual lives, with our spiritual strength. Gratitude-centered breathing exercises are wonderful, right? You're breathing and you're thinking about the things in your life that you can be grateful for, the people in your life that you can be grateful for. And let's talk about love the Lord your God with all your strength, like loving yourself with all of your emotion, right? Your heart. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, loving yourself with all your heart, loving your neighbor, right? So what is heart or emotional movement? How do we bring movement into our emotions? Well, this is wonderful. It's relational. It's communal. Do it with someone. Walk with someone. If you have a hobby that you love to do that is requiring movement, introduce that to someone. Invite someone into your experiences. Group hikes, group walks. This is a beautiful way to say, okay, I can produce and movement can actually help me become a emotionally well person because I can walk with people and I can learn to listen and interact. This is especially helpful for those of you that have never had to make a phone call before in your life. You've grown up with text messages, right? And it's a real thing. That the social interaction oftentimes can feel overwhelming, but to bring an activity into that can help us make connection with others. It nurtures our hearts through a shared experience. And one of the most beautiful things about Indigenous wisdom and this idea of movement, right, is that it teaches us that health is a communal reality. It is relational, right? That health, physical health even, is not simply this one strand, but it's done in community. We learn from others. We live with others. And real physical health and real healthy spirituality, these things invite us into a life of acceptance and care and gratitude for our bodies. Not as a sacred gift and as temples. And they don't invite us to see them as things that we have to change and make beautiful and fit some standard. Our bodies aren't objects to be perfected. Right? We don't have to meet the shifting of society and what society says is beautiful. No. When we think about it this way, holistically, and we bring movement in, we can go, okay, our bodies are an opportunity for wellness, moving them. And it shifts us out of the mindset of, I've got to look this way, I've got to think this way, I've got to fit into this size, into, no, I want to be a holistically well person. And so movement is one of the 7 circles. And there's so many ways that you can do this. One of the things that for a huge chunk of my life that was such a healing thing for me. This is going to sound really weird, and some of you are going to be really surprised by this, giving my spirituality of a peacemaker, is that I trained and studied and taught martial arts for decades. I know, it's really hard to imagine, right? I earned my 4th degree black belt in American Kempo, and I taught this to people, and yes. No, don't clap. It's been a long time. I hurt my back thinking about it now, But here's what was fascinating for me, and I didn't really know it at the time because I was real young when I started. I was 18 or 19, but for me, it helped me mentally because when I was training, I was going to get hurt if I wasn't focused. So all the stress and pressures in my life, this kind of hour a day where I would be in the gym and working out and learning this stuff, it captivated my mind. Whether I was learning, martial arts has these things called forms, which are basically dances. I always joke, it's violent dance is what it is. And but I'd have to focus deeply on that because I wasn't a super coordinated person. So getting the right arm and the left arm to do things and the right leg and the left things to do things right. So I always had to focus mentally. It was a spiritual exercise because you were embracing the reality of other people in the room. You were breathing, focusing. There was an emotional heart element to it because it created a sense of community. And this seems like the weirdest thing for those people that maybe have never been involved in more kind of contact sports. But the community in the martial arts world is so fascinating because you have this shared experience. And so 1 minute you'll have gloves on your feet and your hands and a helmet on your head and you're kicking each other and things like that. But then you're having a drink later and you're chatting and you're talking and you're laughing and you're exploring and you're congratulating one another. And the belt test was this very spiritual experience of all this hard work that led up to something, sometimes years of work. And you have people, so you've got to find what works for you, right? What fits in your world. And you can actually find something that will get you moving, that can speak to all these quadrants of your life. And it's movement. And I know for me, my brain works in such a way that I don't do the just go to the gym for the sake of going to the gym. That just doesn't motivate me. I'm already married. I mean, how much better does this need to look, right? And you laugh, but you know it's true because some of you have been through the pain of divorce and you're I should go to the gym, right? I mean, it's funny because it's true, but it's not funny. And my wife is I can't believe you just said that. Oh my gosh. I'm just a truth teller. But I always need, I have such low self-esteem. I always needed some feedback loop. I needed the belt tester. I ran marathon. I needed the finish line, the date, or when I did triathlons. I just had to figure out that thing that I was motivated towards, right? I just couldn't do it. But you're going to be different. But you can ask yourself this question, how can movement do this? And how can I intentionally integrate movement into my life? Because if I do that, it will contribute to your wellness, your holistic wellness. And for me, it's peace. It's peace. It's wholeness. It's who you are as a person, right? Movement integrated, some way of movement that embraces these 4 quadrants. Physically, it'll enhance your strength, your flexibility, your vitality. Emotionally, you'll find yourself being able to release emotions of anxiety. You can release emotions that are hold up inside of you through the movement. Mentally, you'll have to focus on what you're doing. It'll improve clarity in your life. Spiritually, it'll encourage deeper connections with people. You do it with others. In short, adapting a healing circle approach or a medicine wheel approach to movement, right? It will enrich the entirety of your life. You will grow in your strength spiritually, physically, emotionally, relationally, mentally. And it just moves you towards balance, towards joy, meaningful living. Jesus said, I've come that you'd have life and have it to the fullest. I find this to be a great intersection. How do I have life to the fullest? Well, I think about the fullness of my life. So as we have communion today, right, as we just pause, what is it that God's inviting you into? As you grab the cup, as you grab the bread from your table or from the tables around you, I just invite you to consider the question, what is God, creator, the universe, again, whatever word works for you, What's the invitation for you? Well, I hope it's to embrace movement as a healing circle, to say, okay, I can take this great wisdom from indigenous peoples that offer us about the beauty and the importance of movement. And I can find myself in that space of life to the fullest. I can find myself loving myself, which will help me love my neighbor. I want to encourage you to engage in movement and see it not as a way to perfect your body, as a way to fit some standard of what the world says you're supposed to look like, but to engage movement as a way to honor and celebrate the sacredness of your body, the sacredness of your life, right? Paul calls it the temple, your body being the temple of the Holy Spirit. It's the same idea that there's something sacred about this fleshy stuff. And by caring for it, right, we're honoring that, not punishing it. It's not self-shame. It's a way of honoring it. And then through trial and error, find a movement that you enjoy. Find a way of moving. Just try things, right? Try things. This song that we're going to sing here for communion, I'm going to invite those of you that are able to, that would like to stand to get ready to receive the bread and the cup. You know, this song that we're going to sing is an older song, and it's really great because it speaks to life that is given to us. I think it speaks to a lot the indigenous way of recognizing creator, of recognizing breath and power. And this song says, it's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. And there's a lot of, I think, misunderstandings around the concept of praise and what this is all about and things like that. But what I love about this song is it speaks to the life that we hold, and that we then can take that breath in and we can exhale it in a way that is honoring of the divine spirit in us and around us. And the way in which we we're talking about a physical exhale, but it's a metaphor for the choices we make every day to honor the sacredness of our bodies, right? That our bodies, and when we move them, can actually produce spiritual healing and spiritual health. So I'll give you a few moments here today, a couple of songs for us to consider. How can we do this? And maybe as you're thinking about this, as you're having communion, a thought comes to your mind. Write it down on your paper. Oh, this is a way I could move. This is how movement could affect me spiritually in a healthy way. As a reminder to everyone, the bread and the juice is for every person. There's no class to take, no prayer to pray, nothing like that. These are symbols, metaphors of the great love that the God of the universe has for all of us, and that is in all of us, and is demonstrated in the life, death, and resurrection stories of Jesus. The body of Christ broken for you, and the blood of Christ shed for you. Take and eat and drink and consider